Lisa has been involved in nanotechnology research and development for nearly 20 years. She started when she was 5, with a particular interest in advancing technology commercialization through university, industry, government collaboration. And she has been active in nanotechnology policy issues on the state and regional levels as a director of Virginia Nanotechnology Initiative, just like the New York Nanotechnology Initiative. Folks down south, they have one too. And she's a member of Virginia General Assembly's Joint Commission on Technology and Science, Citizens Nanotechnology Advisory Committee, and Energy Advisory Committee. That long. Okay. Lisa has earned her Ph.D. and Master of Science in Engineering in Material Science and Engineering from the Johns Hopkins University, and she has her Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from University of Central Florida. But don't let those out-of-state degrees mess you up. She is grown right here in New York from Remsen, Dr. Lisa Friedersdorf.
Is that working? We're good? All right. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited. Yes, I was born in St. Luke's, right down the road, and it's a pleasure to be back. Mohawk Nanostar, I'm going to have to keep that in mind. So just to give you a sense of what I plan to talk to you about today, and since we're a small group and since Sally also went through some examples of nanotechnology, I'm certainly willing to diverge. So if something comes up, if you'd like to kind of steer things a different direction, please feel free to you know, ask questions or something throughout. We can certainly accommodate that. First, I want to emphasize the fact that, you know, everything I'm going to talk to you about today is my own personal perspective. You'll see a lot of Virginia examples, partly because I have easy access to Virginia pictures and I like to use a lot of pictures. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is nano, how I define nanotechnology. Look at some applications. You've seen some applications in the earlier presentation. Some things that I've found make my students go, wow. Those are the things I really try to pull out. And then I'd like to talk about partnerships. I've been involved in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, in a number of activities that have been partnerships. And I'd like to talk to you about a couple of those examples, and then we'll talk about workforce education. So what is nanotechnology? The way I define nanotechnology is the control and manipulation of matter at the atomic and molecular level. Okay, so it's things at a very, very small level. And I like to talk to students about why now? And I think that that's maybe a critical question for the Mohawk Valley too. Why nanotechnology now? If you look at the history of nanotechnology, Feynman talked back in 1959 about challenging the community with aspects of nanotechnology. And we're beginning to really see the results of those things. And now, and again, I'm using that now broadly, not this moment in time, but over the past couple of decades. If we look at why nanotechnology is really moving forward now, it's because we now have the tools to control and manipulate matter, to image, to understand what's there. We had carbonaceous nanomaterials forever. Every time you have a forest fire, we didn't know they were there. Now we have the ability to image, control, and manipulate matter at this level. So how big is a nanometer? So we use this term nano. What does it mean? You know, it's a billionth of a meter. What does that mean? So it's really almost impossible to wrap your head around what a nanometer is. So if you think about a sphere with a diameter of a nanometer, that is to a baseball as a baseball is to the earth, okay? If you think about a piece of paper is about 100,000 nanometers thick. So we're talking about things, you know, and controlling matter at a scale 100,000 times smaller than the thickness of a piece of paper. And a human hair is on the order, you know, typically on the order of 80,000 nanometers. So we're talking about things that are really, really little. But what's the big deal about something that's so little, right? Why do we care? you know? We care because size matters. When we start to look at materials at this size scale, they behave differently. They're different, okay? And I mean, I find it very exciting. You'll see that I really like this stuff. If you look at gold, you know, as an example, gold's a material we're all familiar with. It's inert, right? We use it in jewelry. But when you get it at the nanoscale, all of a sudden it can become a catalyst. It can become active, okay? And that's because it's small. Other examples, you look at silver. I mean, silver is something we're all familiar with in silverware and jewelry, but it's used now as an antimicrobial agent. And somebody mentioned earlier the socks to prevent odor and those types of things. When I'm in Virginia, I always use an example of the opposing team using it in their sporting equipment so they don't smell quite so bad. But the applications are endless. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the applications. But this is a 2D example just to begin to visualize what's different about something that's small. So if you look at these two-dimensional arrays, they're not that much different in size, but if you look at the one on the left, there's about 40% of the atoms are on the surface. If you look at the one on the left, it's 90% surface atoms. That's different, okay? And when you start talking about how those atoms interact with each other, you start talking about the bonding and the behavior of those atoms with respect to each other, it's different. But it's not just size that matters, it's arrangement that matters too. So if we look at something like allotropes of carbon, all of these materials are 100% carbon. Their chemical composition is exactly the same, they're carbon. But they're incredibly different because the way the atoms are arranged. Okay, we're familiar with diamond. We know diamond is transparent, it's hard, which is completely different than the lead of our pencil. Okay, and Buckyballs are another example of an allotrope of carbon. And just to talk a little bit more about some other carbonaceous nanomaterials because they're very exciting materials, and I'll show some applications in a moment. These are other examples of allotropes of carbon. There's fullerenes. It's modeled after a soccer ball. I mean, a soccer ball is like a representation of a buckyball. Nanotubes, nanosheets, which are thin layers. These were investigated before graphene was understood well, so they're on the order of 2 or 3 layers, atomic layers of graphite in the form of sheets, used for things like EM shielding and photo arrays and things like that. Multi-walled nanotubes are tubes in a tube. Nano onions are similar to tubes in a tube, but they're buckyballs in a buckyball, kind of like the Russian dolls. And those have very exciting electrical properties that are being explored for photovoltaics and advanced nanoelectronics. And then there's also fullerenes, these buckyballs, they have molecules inside. Okay, and these metallofullerenes have rotational properties where the inside rotates different than the outside, which gives it great material properties for things like MRI imaging. And of course, graphene. So just to look at one particular allotrope of carbon and look at carbon nanotubes just for a moment. Nanotubes have gotten a lot of attention because they have fabulous properties. And they have properties that are amazing in many different aspects. Their mechanical properties are about 100 times stronger than steel. Their electrical properties, depending on how we connect those, we take these sheets and they're connected, depending on their chirality, how they're twisted, they may have metallic properties or they may be semiconducting. Okay, so there's things like advanced nanoelectronics that can be developed. Thermally, they conduct heat better than diamond, which for a long time was the best known thermal conductor. And then they have amazing optical surface. And just thinking of their geometry, they're like a straw. They make a great probe at a very, very small scale. So now that we're able to control and manipulate matter at this level, And we're finding new properties of materials that we didn't know existed before. It's really exciting time to be a scientist. And I think that it's fantastic for the students to be introduced to this early in their education, and hopefully it's something that can spark their interest as they move forward. But it's an exciting time, in my opinion, for the consumer and the general public as well, because the possibilities are endless, and the future's already here. So if you look at the application of nanotechnology now, here's some examples. Sporting goods is an area where you often see early implementation of new technologies because there's some people who are willing to pay the price differential. I always use this example, and I was recently putting together a talk, and my son looked over my shoulder at the hockey image, and he's a hockey goalie. And he said, I just feel pain every time I see that picture because I know what happens when the puck hits. But at least his head is protected with things like a helmet with carbon nanotubes. Water repellency. The picture on the top right, I snapped in a Walmart in Florida while I was on vacation. There was a nail salon in the front of the Walmart. And it's hard to see, but the word nanotechnology is there. And it said, combining beauty with strength. I just thought that was wonderful. Of course, the guy, you can only see part of his face. He was really confused, but I love that image. And then the chocolate gum. And I've looked up, I wanted to find a little bit more information. I've used this example for a lot of years because the thought of chocolate gum is just kind of strange. And I'm not sure the company is still in business, but I learned that the cocoa butters, the fats in the cocoa butters, broke down the elastic nature of what's in the gum so that you couldn't have chocolate gum before they were able to make nanocrystals of the cocoa and have it embedded so you had this sensation that wasn't quite so strange. In fact, there's over 1,000 products that have been inventoried that incorporate nanotechnology in some way. And you can find this on the web. Woodrow Wilson and Pew Charitable Trust work together to put together an inventory. You'll see that there's all kinds of categories. These are just the major categories. And you can go in there and you can search and you can look at those. And there's just a tremendous amount of materials that already incorporate nanotechnology in some way. But because nanotechnology is associated with size and is not just a single material or a single application, nanotechnology is really going to impact everything. And when I talk to my students and I get excited and I tell them that nanotechnology is going to be everywhere, we look at big problems. I mean, big problems like energy. Right? I mean, this is something that is facing us now, is facing them in the future. You know, how are we going to deal with the energy needs in a sustainable way of the country and the world? And if you look at the alternative energy advances that we've had, they're going to incorporate nanotechnology. If you look at fuel cells, advanced batteries, ultracapacitors, photovoltaics, whether you're looking at all new types of solar cells that include organic or polymer structures that are new and unique because we have nanotechnology, or you're looking at coatings or nanotexturing of existing technology, silicon technology, that is just improved with nanotechnology. Also, if you look at a catalysis for the production of biofuels. So nanotechnology is going to play a huge role in all of these areas. And I inevitably have a student who says, wind is huge. What about wind? Wind is going to play a huge role in our energy future. And where's the nano there? And if we look at, just to remind you of the scale of a wind turbine, and if you've never been up close to one, this is pictures from, my family visited the wind farm that was going up in Lewis County, and you can tell it was one of your trademark winter days. Actually, I think this was August. Yeah, just kidding. It was actually, I think it was Thanksgiving, but I had never been up close to a wind turbine. And to look at the size of these, you know, you can understand why the students tell me nano and wind are incompatible. But that's not true. Nanotechnology is going to play a significant role in wind. And I don't know that those turbines incorporated this type of thing, but this is being used in some turbines, which is a superhydrophobic coating, which is a water repellent coating, and the water just runs right off. So that means that you don't have water buildup. It becomes self-cleaning. It's textured similar to a hostas or a lotus leaf. It self-cleans any dirt, soot, microbes. It's very important in offshore wind, where you want to prevent corrosion, where you don't want the buildup of fouling. So nanotechnology absolutely plays a role in wind. It also, there's a company in Richmond, Virginia, that's making a lubricant that is used in the gears as well, that is nano-based. So I still contest that nano is everywhere. I used the lotus leaf example. I just wanted to give a couple other examples. Again, I like to use pictures that will catch my students' eyes, and they really love the gecko. And the thought of adhesives that are modeled after the gecko's feet. Things like the morph butterfly, the color associated with the nano texture is being used not only for optical implications, but also being used in photovoltaics to capture more of the photons and the light. And NASA also has a concept which is really fantastic, and I have some videos that I can share the link of the videos where there's a morphing plane, and that's based on natural flight, but also on developments in nanotechnology in the structure and the communication of small members. And I won't belabor this because I know Sally talked a great deal about applications of nanotechnology in medicine, but the implications are going to be profound. When we get to the point where we can actually detect and treat cancer at the cellular level, I think that it's just amazing. Other areas that I find exceptionally exciting are things like tissue regeneration. I'm really hoping they make great progress in the development of regrowing cartilage in the near future. Lab on a chip, as Sally mentioned, using microfluidics and using nano properties to run all sorts of assays at the same time. And then imaging. The advances in imaging have been just phenomenal, and being able to really look at a much smaller level than what was possible in the past. In nanoelectronics, and this is something that's dear to you here, we're reaching the point in electronics where we want things to be smaller and faster. We're reaching the physical limitations where existing technology is no longer going to work. So we're developing all kinds of new, not only new materials, but new architectures, new ways of storing and manipulating information. And these are going to have a profound impact on this area and the entire nation and world. Nanotechnology in the environment, I just wanted to address this very briefly. There's a lot of work that's been going on for many years. Michael Hocella from Virginia Tech has been looking at nanoparticles in the environment, both natural nanoparticles and man-made nanoparticles. And nanotechnology is being used to improve the environment as well. The example I have here is of a point-of-use water treatment, where they're using, they go abroad and help local communities use nano silver in their existing methodologies for filtering water. So by using local materials, developing a filter and incorporating nano silver to help with the water treatment, it's a low-cost point-of-use application. There's also an example that was posted, and I believe this was out of Rice University, that is looking at a nano sponge, which is a carbon nanomaterial-based sponge, which is superhydrophobic, which means that it repels the water. They show a video, there's a link there, where they poke it into the water and it just pops right out because it's so super hydrophobic. But it is oleophilic, which means that it sucks in the oil. And they're able to use this sponge to attract oil and then they can burn off the oil and use it again. So this has great implications in cleanups where necessary. And I learned last night during the reception that there's work here also at SUNYIT that is looking at nanoparticles for water remediation. So many of the things that I just showed you and a lot of the current applications, and if you look at that inventory, you'll see that for a large part, it's really looking at taking existing products and making them a little better, making a golf club that will help you hit the ball farther, or a bat, which is more effective. So it's making things better, but it's not the new and novel things which are yet to come. And if you look at, here's just some of the examples that have been in the news recently. The top left is looking at a polymer photovoltaic that's transparent. So if you could coat all the windows, and if you think of a city where there's walls and walls of window, and you wouldn't lose the ability to see through your window, but you could be collecting the photons and converting that to energy. Multifunctional drug delivery, where you can either image and deliver a payload. The bottom right, power felt, is an example of carbon nanotubes that are embedded in a fabric. And this works off the thermoelectric properties, so the difference in thermal heat from your body in the air, that differential, they're able to collect electricity. You'll see a lot of these energy scavenging technologies being developed. Some of them are based on vibration, where they take the vibrational energy and convert that. So there's a number of these different techniques that are being developed, and you'll see the headline, "Charge your cell phone in your pocket," which I think will be a great thing. I know my son's phone is always dead, and I can never get him, so if he could charge it in his pocket, we'd be all good. The other example is solar paint. Again, like the windows, but now in areas where you don't need the transparency as well. And I just recently found the snail story, and my students have just really resonated with this, being able to use a snail as a power source. And what they did is they used carbon nanotube electrodes that had enzymes, and there was just a reaction that occurred that did not harm the snail in any way. They kept the experiment going, and the snail living for over 4 months. So again, the possibilities, I'm sure I can't even begin to imagine what we're going to be seeing over the next couple decades. So, switching gears completely. And I would really love for this part of the discussion to be more of a dialogue. I wanted to talk a little bit about partnerships and collaboration and the importance of these things in developing nano activities in the Mohawk Valley. I'm going to give a couple of just generic examples based on work that I've done in Lehigh and in Virginia of models where the community and the university work together. There's examples where you're looking at pre-competitive research, where industries have like interests and pool their money together, and then through that pooled money, they have a board collect proposals, select projects that they then fund. But these pre-competitive activities not only accomplish the goal of the individual projects that are funded and the science that are developed, but it also builds connections between the industry members and the students and the faculty that are involved. And even that pooled money that is used for these small projects often leads to connections which lead to much bigger separate projects that are outside of that pool. And that's one way where industry, academia work together. Another example, we had an industrial liaison program where we had members join a program. And these members, instead of having their money pooled, they had their own activities, their own agenda. They were able to be under the umbrella of this liaison program where there was communication was facilitated if there was a point of contact. And that point of contact, whatever the industry needed, that point of contact found it. And just that communication and facilitation function was very helpful. And again, they had individual projects that they worked on, whether they were a failure. I mean, they ranged everything from large research projects to failure analysis to testing, being a neutral party testing facility, a wide range of activities kind of under the same umbrella. But the industry folks really interacted independently in that sense. And in the final example I really wanted to spend a little bit of time on is looking at the development of a multi-million-dollar project that we did over the past several years. And this is where these types of resources really come together to build something bigger than any of the pieces. And Sally talked about finding your place. And I think that in these large projects, multi-million-dollar programs, you'll have heavily leveraged activities. So let me run through the story just a little bit. There was a consortium of industry members. They have a national consortium. They pool their money and they fund research at universities across the country, typically in the form of major research centers. And those centers involve a great number of people. They were interested in working with a very specific faculty member. They loved his research. They wanted to expand on what he was doing. So there was a real connection that already existed. But in order for this project to move forward and at the scale that was necessary, there was considerable leveraging that had to take place. So the one piece was the research. And the professors worked together with the industry members. They iterated the proposal. They dealt with the science part. But in parallel, there was also an enormous need for leveraged funds. One of the partners required a 3-to-1 funding leverage. And that's not insignificant. So looking at state funds, at local funds, looking at a collaboration which was not just an individual academic institution, but was a collaboration among 3 universities, and finding the faculty members that not only had the technical expertise, but were able to work with an industry partner and look at the commercialization, look at the student involvement that would take it through to commercialization. And it took us almost 3 years to pull together the leveraged funds with state funds, with academic funds, and get the timing such that they all matched. And the key driver to this project, I mean, this is something I'm very excited about. The key driver for the industry folks was not only the basic research that was going to happen, but access to the students and knowledge that the community was ready to take whatever spin-offs or whatever activities came from that work and move it forward into the commercial arena. So there was a lot of pieces at play. And these pieces are not always transparent. There's a lot that has to go into what happens before the announcement of a new center. So this was one example that we toiled over for many years. And that specific example focused on these 3 academic partners and their industry members, but none of this would have been possible without all the other players that played a role that aren't involved in that specific project, but will play a role in the infrastructure that will keep that project and grow it into the future. And this includes a technician training program that was again, not connected to the actual project, but played a key role to the industry members, knowing that as they grow, they'll have a workforce. the economic development team at the state being responsive and aware of the resources that exist and the activities that are going on and how to leverage that with other activities that they know are going on in the state. These are all critical pieces. K-12, I'm going to talk a little bit more about education. The universities have a number of roles to play. I mean, certainly the research, but also the education of the students and the interaction with industry and the community as a whole. In federal research labs, you're just so lucky to have a close access and close ties to a federal resource, a laboratory right here. So workforce development, when I talk to my industry colleagues, there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple decades where we have seen a lot of offshoring and labor costs were always mentioned as a big driver for that. We're seeing that that's no longer the case. And really access to talent and access to talent over the pipeline, and not only of their projects, but of their the people who make the products that go into theirs. There's a whole network that goes into support advanced technology. And the workforce is just a critical component of that in every piece of that. From K-12, community college technician training programs, and university and advanced degrees. And again, I'm giving you my personal opinion, so for what it's worth. Core skills, moving forward, math, science, technology, these are critical. Math is often a real barrier when students try to move forward, because they might have a love for the science, but if they don't have the foundational math to couple with that, it makes it much harder. Technology, our kids are so tech savvy, it's ridiculous, but having an understanding of what's behind the interface that they play with all day, but not at the expense of communication. Our students need to be able to communicate. I have so many engineering students where I make them do projects and they have to do a presentation or report, and they're like, well, I'm an engineer, I don't have to write. And I'm like, you have to write proposals, you have to write reports, you have to communicate with your boss, you have to communicate with the general public. They cannot be overstated how important that is. So K-12, you think about nanotechnology, and this is some advanced concept. I've tried to show you that it's not so far out, it's actually here. But also the concepts, kids can get so much. And if nanotechnology can excite them into science and technology, let's use it for what it's worth. But they can also get things like size and scale. There's nanotechnology concepts that can be developed even at very early ages that can make people comfortable with these concepts and grow up with it. And I think it's also very important for the general public to have a working knowledge and comfort with these advanced technologies. So just a quick plug. There's only so much I can do as an individual. I've talked with a lot of teachers, I talk with a lot of folks, but I'm really passionate about really trying to promote science and technology with students. And I've started a student group at the University of Virginia. It's inherently cross-disciplinary. We've been going on for about 5 years. They do all kinds of activities. You can see them listed here. We bring in exciting speakers based on whatever they want to do. They really drive this process. So one year we had a group of students that were just really interested in energy. So we brought in all kinds of different energy speakers to share that knowledge and give them access to the cutting edge that they wouldn't normally have. But the students at UVA also work with the area high schools. And we have some junior clubs where there's a connection between the high school students and the university group. And the high school students are obligated, and most of them want to, but it's part of their mission to work with the local middle schools. So the hope is that this becomes scalable and they can really help promote science, technology, engineering, and the love of science and work on that pipeline. So this is my group at the University of Virginia, and we are expanding that to include other university chapters. There's 3 groups in Virginia and Maryland universities that are interested in establishing their own group, and we're moving forward to help network these together. So, and we certainly hope that SUNYIT becomes a piece of that as well. So I wanted to share some nanotechnology resources. So where can you learn more? Where can you point people? If you have an interested student or colleague or friend, where can you learn more about nanotechnology? So I've picked, I mean, there's a number of resources, but I've picked a handful here. Of course, the NNI website has a tremendous amount of information. Some of the other ones that I would point out, the Nanoscale Informal Science Education Network has a lot of activities especially geared toward younger kids, and they have kits, and they have an annual event, which is a week-long event to help promote nanotechnology informal science education across the nation. It's the same week, and there's events all over the country. The University of Virginia did a number of teacher training programs, and through that process they developed, I think, a very good list, and I often send people to that site to look for a long list of other resources. And then I wanted to call your attention to the appendices in a report. A couple of years ago, we held a workshop looking at international benchmarking of nanotechnology education and looking at what other nations are doing in this area. And the report is interesting too, I think, but the appendices are especially valuable. And I've pulled out just one page to share with you, which shows, and I know this is really ridiculously tiny, but what it shows is a list of resources where it maps those resources to what it covers and what age group it focuses on. So there are so many resources. If you, if you're a teacher and you want to do a nano experiment in your class, you don't need to make it up. You can go find, there's just a huge amount of resources that already exist. And this is a great inventory and mapping of what's there to what you might want. So I would encourage you to look at that if you're interested in learning more. And with that, I would like to thank you again for having me back to SUNYIT, and I welcome any questions.
There you go.
Yes, the question is about the use of nanotechnology in photovoltaic cells.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch it.
The use of nanotechnology for photovoltaic cells.
Uh-huh.
Recently, NREL has announced that they have a cell based on quantum dots using multiple exciton generation with the efficiency of more than 100. But my question to you is, what are the practical limitation in commercializing this product? Also, in general, the commercialization issues relating with a lot of nanotechnology research which is taking place. Thank you.
So, could you repeat the second half? I'm sorry. The commercialization issues facing nanotechnology?
Nanotechnology research.
Okay. All right, so first let me talk about photovoltaics. There's a tremendous amount of ongoing research in photovoltaics that employ nanotechnology, and whether that's something to improve the capture rate or to prevent the recombination, or as you said, to have a multi-excitation where if you have one photon, you're creating more than one electron-hole pair, which is why you get a greater than 100% at the lab scale. As far as commercializing, I don't know the details of that specific system, so I'm not going to talk in specifics about the difficulties in manufacturing of that. But I will say that there is it's not easy going from where they are to where they need to be. But there's a lot of progress that's underway right now. There's a focus on nanomanufacturing issues at the national level. There's a focus on where are the roadblocks and how can we help bridge those. There's also work, if you look at photovoltaics and in that type of system, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for a roll-to-roll, but certainly in a lot of the organic photovoltaics, that technology will develop in roll-to-roll manufacturing, which also plays a role in flexible electronics. So the synergies that exist between these different technologies will begin to help them mature and commercialize because we're dealing with the same manufacturing issues in the scale-up that affect more than one technology or application, and that will improve the development as it moves forward. Lab to marketplace in nanotechnology, I think, again, if you look at nanotechnology, it's so incredibly broad, so it's hard to make general statements about that. I mean, if you look at the production of nanomaterials and if you're looking at the building blocks and the scale up of the production of nanomaterials, you're seeing that happening, but that's different than developing a photovoltaic cell or advanced nanoelectronics, for instance. So the processes associated with the application really drive what barriers exist there. But I'm not sure they're any more difficult than advanced technologies that we've seen in the past. I think the research to commercialization that's always been a difficulty, and I think it's recognized in the community, and I think that's why the partnerships and the collaborations become so important, because you have people who are great at the research, but they need to partner with the people who are great at the commercialization, and there's a role for a lot of different players in that space. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Can you explain how the nanotech and solar panels, how you transfer the actual sunlight into electricity? I've never understood that.
So there's got to be double E's in the room who can do a better job at this than I can, but I can take a shot for you.
Thank you.
So the fundamental physics that are involved is you end up with a photon which has an energy associated with its wavelength, and it comes into the system, and it knocks an electron loose from where it normally exists, and then you have an electron and you have a hole, and they have opposite charges. And if you're able to drive them to an electrode before they recombine, then you're able to get an electrical current. So that, in a nutshell, is how a photovoltaic system works.
Thank you.
And please correct me
Thank
if
you.
I'm wrong. Is that okay? Material scientist. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Lisa, just kind of interested in your next program.
Oh, great.
In having come from New York State, and I'm assuming you might be a graduate of Remsen Central School?
I actually moved before I graduated, but I started my education there, absolutely.
Okay. One of the observations that I see is that I'm a former high school teacher, and I see a wall in the K through 12 curriculum in New York State. I guess I'm just going to ask you, in terms of your observations of Virginia public education and what you remember about New York State public education, how does Virginia introduce STEM into the K through 12 curriculum better than New York State apparently does?
Well, I'm not going to make a judgment call and say that it's better or not, but I will talk a little bit, and I taught AP Chem and AP Physics, so I feel for you. I think school teachers are just amazing human beings and so critically important. But I will say that very recently we have gotten nanotechnology in our SOLs, our standards of learning in Virginia, and they're just being implemented this year. And this was due to, I mean, a lot of people have been involved in the discussion. I think we had a Virginia Nano Initiative many years ago. Education has always been a key part of that. But there's a couple key people who were really pivotal in that, and that is Jim Batterson, who's retired from NASA, Langley, and also the Math Science Innovation Center that's centered in Richmond that works with the teachers in the surrounding counties and runs a number of programs. They were really pivotal in getting these concepts embedded in the K-12 education. I hesitate to, like I said, draw any sort of comparison or judgment calls, and most of my knowledge of what's going on in Virginia is a parent, as my children went through. And then also working with the General Assembly at the issues that have come up and the interest in getting it in. I think that Virginia recognizes that it's critical to its economic vitality. I think that when we try to draw industry to Virginia, the workforce and the educational system has been a key issue for a long time. So I think it helps that there's a recognition between the need for STEM and the economics. So marrying those two so that when decisions are made and policies are developed, they recognize that it has to be in there. And that means that there's less resistance to new ideas because it's seen as pivotal moving forward. I'm not sure that I could speak to a general way that Virginia does it differently than other states. I think the recognition of the importance is probably more, again, from my personal opinion, plays a bigger role than any mechanistic way that they're teaching or anything like that. I think the value is more important. And we're seeing that. We've done a lot in Southside Virginia, in areas where we've had more economic disparity, and looking at STEM as a way to change that. Tobacco region, textile region, these were very heavily, hard hit in Virginia, and we've been looking at a nano cluster in the southern part of the state and bringing advanced technology in there, and the workforce is just a huge piece of that. I'm not sure that answered your question. I hope that helps a little bit.
Lisa, is there anyone who's actually looking at the end run of all of this? When today's technology becomes yesterday's technology. So we've got this stockpile of cell phones, this stockpile of computers. What do we do with these non-corrosive substances?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think first of all, as Sally mentioned, I think that there's been a real effort from the very beginning to be proactive at understanding long-term implications and long-term impact. I recently saw an image which was just mind-boggling of old cell phones and electronics and just the mass volume. And one of the things that's being developed, which I think is really exciting, and I had it on my future application slide, it was epidural nano electronics. It's actually, the substrate is actually cellulosic. So looking at materials that come from wood products, which are much more environmentally friendly, both in producing them and then also in disposing them. So I think that there is a big move in that direction, and I think that there's an understanding. When we're looking at advanced nanoelectronics, as things get smaller and things like quantum computing, the game is going to completely change. But I think that people are very proactive at looking at not cradle to grave. It's not cradle to grave anymore. You don't make it and throw it away. It's cradle to cradle. What do we do with it next? And I think that that's been a change over the past several years.
Kind of a different question. You were talking about research and commercialization of nanotech products. I work in industry that maybe I'm more sheltered, but I don't see a lot of that introduction into there. What's the marketing capability, bringing it into the private sector, defense sector, to bring these in
Well, but I think that education is not just the students coming in, but the community broadly as well, and understanding what the new possibilities and resources that exist. But looking at, you mentioned the defense industry. I think the defense industry in particular is often an early adopter, but they also are mission specific. They don't care what technology solves their problem. They're looking at solving the problem. If it's nano, great. If it isn't, that's great too. So I think that looking at, nanotechnology, the opportunities for nanotechnology to improve and products and activities is going to continue as it develops. How we get our engineers and existing industry to know about it is through things like this. And I don't know how, and how to solve the problem you're trying to solve. And if nano can help that. But I'm not sure if there's a better way.
Yeah, I was interested in learning a little bit more about how nano can help improve the economy of an area like the Mohawk Valley with, just complete decimation of jobs over the last 25 years. So, for example, I know this is not your specific area of expertise, but which areas of nanotechnology do you think are most ready for commercial development and could potentially be developed in this area?
Well, let me address a couple things in your comments, I guess. I think that an area like the Mohawk Valley and what's happened here at SUNY IT over the past several years is really building the foundation for bringing nanotechnology in, and nanotechnology is an enabler and it's pervasive. So as you build these areas of expertise, there's all sorts of synergies that you don't even know are going to develop, will continue to develop. And I think that that's where my leveraging of resources, understanding what each piece brings together, what everybody in this room, what's your piece in this puzzle as you continue to grow this effort forward, understanding each other so that when opportunities arise, you're able to act on them. But nanotechnology, I think, will bring other areas as well of emerging technologies. What areas do you could see inventories of lots and lots of nano products. So picking what is ripe. There's a lot of things that are getting to that area. And I think nanoelectronics, which is an area of focus here, we're seeing nanoelectronics in the marketplace already. And those things they'll be at a certain stage now. And as new architectures and new materials come along, they will become embedded in that infrastructure moving forward. I'm not sure I would pick a single thing, because I think that when you look at how nanotechnology impacts nanoelectronics, how it impacts other things like photovoltaics, which have perhaps similar aspects, and looking for those synergies to grow more than a single sector, but more broadly, I think will help you develop moving forward. But I think, again, knowing each other, knowing the resources regionally and beyond so that you can leverage, I think is really important.